Will you as a pagan burn in hell? No. Okay, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Well, if you need some more flesh on the bones to change your mind, then stick around. At the end of this video, I'll explain how we put down our old glasses, what new glasses we need, and what we can do about these feelings of sin and guilt. Every day I hear and see pagans who are trying to understand and practice Indo-European spirituality while still looking at the world through Abrahamic glasses. In many cases, the only thing that has changed is the names of the gods. The worldview underneath, the cosmology, the assumptions about morality, guilt and salvation, they often remain the same. It's as if someone leaves Christianity but keeps the same mental framework, simply replacing the Abrahamic God with deities with other names. But the ancient traditions of Europe were not just Christianity with different gods. They were built on an entirely different way of understanding the world, the gods, and our place within the cosmos. And if we want to genuinely reconnect with Indo-European pagan traditions, whether that's Norse, Celtic, Greek, Roman, Vedic or others, then there are many ideas we need to unlearn before we can relearn. And one of the most important of these ideas is sin. Sin is a topic that still causes a lot of confusion, stress and even fear among modern pagans, especially people from non-secular countries where sin plays a central role in how morality and the afterlife are understood. But when we look at the ancient Indo-European worldview, we discover that the concept of sin, as many people imagine it today, simply didn't exist in the same way. It's important to set these things straight, because if we misunderstand something as fundamental as sin, we risk misunderstanding the entire pagan worldview and continue living with our old views and fears. So in this video, we'll take a look at the differences between Abrahamic sin and how ancient Indo-European societies understood wrongdoing and morality. Stick around to the end and I'll show you both that you're not a sinner and that it's great to eat the apple. Let's begin with an example to make the discrepancy between Abrahamic and ancient Indo-European thought very clear. Or some examples. Think of the Indo-European worldview as something like a living ecosystem or a specific biotope. Everything has its place. The gods, humans, animals, ancestors, spirits, plants, and the natural world. Harmony comes from each part fulfilling its role and respecting the balance of the whole. In that sense, what we might call the closest thing to wrongdoing in an Indo-European framework would be like introducing a new and alien species into a fragile ecosystem, an invasive species. Suddenly something is out of place, the balance is disturbed, the system begins reacting, predators shift, plants disappear, the equilibrium changes. The problem isn't that a rule was broken and that someone didn't like that. It's that the order of things has now been disrupted. The Abrahamic concept of sin, on the other hand, is more like a shepherd whose flock has been given clear boundaries. The shepherd sets a fence and says, "Don't cross beyond this." But if some of the sheep push through the fence and wanders outside, the problem isn't that the ecosystem has collapsed. The problem is that the sheep have now disobeyed the shepherd's command and left the place it was told to stay, which he doesn't like. But since it's in the nature of sheep, who are herbivores, opportunists and prey animals, to be curious, to wander, to look for greener grass on the other side, to go search for other use, and to have a strong instinctual flight response, and to do as the others do, then it's also in their nature to try to test the fence and leave the pasture. They do that no matter if the shepherd likes it or not, whether he's put up a fence or not, and even if he's told them not to do this. And since said shepherd doesn't understand and like this, that his sheep are mean, naughty and good for nothing enough to break his rules, what he prefers, which is actually just living by their nature, it's almost as if he doesn't like their true nature at all. Almost as if sheep in general start the game on a minus score, just because they're sheep. Another way to picture the difference is to think of a wolf. In an Indo-European worldview, a wolf that kills and eats a sheep is definitely not a sinner. The wolf isn't evil. It's simply doing what wolves do. It's following its nature and fulfilling the role it has within the wider order of the world. Predator and prey are both part of the same living system. In fact, from that perspective, it would be stranger and more wrong if the wolf didn't follow its nature. If the wolf suddenly refused to hunt, stopped eating meat and tried to live like a sheep, something would be clearly wrong. It would be acting against its own nature and disturbing the natural order it is meant to be a part of. In other words, the problem wouldn't be that the wolf behaved like a wolf, but that it actually failed to act like a wolf. So within this kind of worldview, morality is closely tied to right order and right place. Beings are expected to act according to their nature and their role within the cosmos. That is spirituality. The Abrahamic framework approaches the situation differently. Here, the central question isn't so much whether a creature followed its nature, but whether God's or one God's command or moral law was followed or broken. The focus is less on maintaining a balance of roles in a cosmic ecosystem and more on obedience or disobedience to the will of one divine authority. So while the wolf in the Indo-European example is simply participating in the natural order of things, the Abrahamic model is primarily concerned with whether an action aligns with or violates a command given by one God. In one worldview, the key issue is harmony with one's nature and place, while in the other it's faithfulness to a moral law established by a divine ruler. And let's continue with the example of death. In an Abrahamic framework, the reasoning is often very straightforward. Killing is wrong because one God has commanded that it is wrong. The moral law comes from one divine authority, and humans are expected to obey it. If this God says, "You shall not kill," then taking a life becomes a sin because it violates that command. In an Indo-European worldview, the reasoning tends to look quite different. The emphasis is less on breaking a moral rule and more on violating the natural order of life itself. Life, breath, vitality, life force, that's one of the highest values. It is the flame that moves through humans, animals, plants, and the world itself. And when someone kills another person, the act is wrong not primarily because a cosmic lawgiver prohibited it, but because it prematurely extinguishes that living flame. Death itself is not the problem. Death is part of the natural order. Everything that lives will eventually die. And in many Indo-European traditions, death has its own proper place and time within the cycle of the cosmos. The problem arises when death is brought where life naturally belongs, especially when it comes through deliberate human action rather than the natural unfolding of life and things. In that sense, wrongdoing is less about breaking a rule and more about creating the wrong thing in the wrong place, introducing death where life should still be flourishing. So while the Abrahamic model often frames the act as disobedience to a divine command, the Indo-European perspective tends to see it as a disruption of the natural and cosmic order, an act that places death where life was meant to continue. So in one model, wrongdoing looks like disturbing the balance of a living system. In the other, it looks more like stepping outside the boundaries set by one divine authority. Among our pagan ancestors, it was more about something being the wrong thing in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's, for example, why purification was so extremely important when one had been, for example, in contact with death, at a funeral, for example, because death didn't belong among the living. That is polluting. So one of the clearest differences is that in Indo-European spirituality and worldview, there is also no original sin. People aren't bad or evil automatically. We're not born in a state of sin or morally corrupt. We are born neutral and untainted into a structured and ordered cosmos, a web of obligations and a network of reciprocal relationships. The goal is not salvation from sin, but alignment with and maintenance of harmony. In the Abrahamic faiths, the human being is hereditarily tainted, defective, and dysfunctional already at birth. Not very fair. And the only way to improve is hopefully through one God's approval. Now, the word sin is an Indo-European word, a Germanic word. We see it in Old English sin, Proto-Germanic sundio, and all the way back to Proto-Indo-European suntiao, sunt. So even if the word sin existed and was used long before, for example, Christianity, the substance and concept of it is very different. In the Indo-European and therefore Germanic languages, the connotation of the word sin is rather about a violation of the divine cosmic order, causing or bringing in chaos. And if we take it all the way back to the beginning, it means the being or the one who did it, the one who is guilty of this violation, guilty of going against what's natural, or even he or she who committed the ritual error. Just like how Latin sons and sontis means guilty. So in the Indo-European view, this is rather about the wrong actions vis-a-vis the eternal natural order. It says more about an action and behavior than about inherent character or essence. And when we look at the surviving Indo-European sources, we actually don't really find the word or even the concept of sin in the way we think of it today. If you read texts like the early Indo-Iranian material, the Greek myths, the eposes and the hymns, or even Havamål, you'll certainly find ideas about right and wrong, honor and shame, proper behavior and terrible consequences. People can act foolishly, dishonorably, or destructively. They can violate oaths, show hubris, or disrupt the natural and social order. And they will often suffer for it. But what you don't see is the same framework of sin as a moral stain against a divine lawgiver, something that makes a person inherently guilty before an all-powerful God. That language and that way of thinking doesn't become visible until after the arrival of Christianity. As Christian theology spreads, it brings with it a very specific moral vocabulary: sin, guilt, repentance, salvation. Over time, these ideas begin to shape not just religion, but the way people think about morality itself. One of the very few places when it comes to authentic Indo-European sources and sacred texts where we actually find the word sin is when we read the early Veda scriptures. There we see lines like when the mantra singer asks gods and spirits to, for example, keep us from sin, etc. Aha, you say, so there is sin and sinners in the Indo-European sources. Well, no, not really, because when we read the Vedas, we most likely do so in English. So the problem is the translation, not the Vedas, obviously. When we encounter the word sin in English translations of the Vedas, we are reading a translator's theological choice, not an equivalent of an Abrahamic moral concept. And the two most famous translators and editors of the Vedas are Ralph Griffith and Friedrich Max Müller, who were both children of their time and very devout Christians, even missionaries so. And since they were working within a Christian moral framework, a biblical vocabulary and a European theological mindset and Abrahamic glasses of the 1800s, they chose the word sin. And this is problematic both because there is no equivalent of the Christian sin in the Vedas, and because the translators use the same word for at least 10 different Sanskrit words or concepts, all with their own connotation. Words like papa, enas, aga, amhas, durita and amrita have all been translated into sin, when in fact they mean things like causing negative consequences, ritual error, misalignment with cosmic order, bad cause, the wrong path, misfortune, distress, harm, etc. So when the Vedic poets in Sanskrit, what they really do when they ask to be released from sin, the tone and connotation is rather about fear of misalignment with order, fear of doing or saying the wrong thing in ritual, etc. They meant something like, let us not violate Rita, the cosmic order. Keep us from error, from misalignment, from disturbing the sacred order. And definitely not existential guilt, moral self-loathing or need for salvation. There is no doctrine of original sin, eternal damnation, salvation from a fallen nature, hurting a jealous monotheistic lawgiver, etc. And that is a radically different worldview and fits perfectly with the broader Indo-European pattern. Ritual precision matters, alignment with cosmic order matters, reciprocity and hospitality matters, oaths matter, words matter, and so on. In the Greek myths, we see Icarus be given artificial wings by his father Daedalus to escape imprisonment. He's warned not to fly too high or too low, but to stay within proper limits. But he becomes exhilarated, flies too close to the sun, and oversteps the bounds of what a human should do. And the sun melts the wax in his wings. He falls into the sea and dies. In terms of cosmic order, Icarus isn't punished for sin in a moral law sense. He fails because he forgets his true nature and place in cosmos, trying to rise into a realm that belongs to the gods. His mistake wasn't evil. It was exceeding human limits, ignoring balance and measure. His fall is the natural consequence of stepping outside what he was meant to be, his dharma. The same goes for Niobe, a queen who boasts that she is superior to the goddess Leto because she has more children. She elevates herself above a goddess, meaning she fails to know her place. And the result? Apollo and Artemis kill her children. This is a classic example of a human versus divine hierarchy violation. Phaeton, the son of the sun god Helios, and a nymph, he travels to the sun god's palace in the east and asks for the privilege to drive his chariot, something only a god can control, obviously. His ride is of course disastrous, and as a result, he drives the chariot too close to the earth, burning it, and too far from it, freezing it. And Zeus strikes him down with a lightning bolt. His tale was commonly used to explain why in uninhabitable lands on both sides of extremity, such as hot deserts and frozen wastelands, why they exist. And this is something we see again and again in Indo-European hymns, myths, and stories. They're usually not trying to show us what bad people these characters were or to condemn them. Instead, they are much closer to illustrations of how life, nature, and the cosmos actually work. The characters aren't just individuals, they are expressions of forces, patterns, and principles that exist in the world and the cosmos itself. So when someone like Icarus flies too high, or Niobe elevates herself above the gods, the story isn't primarily saying, look how sinful these people are. It is showing something deeper. What happens when boundaries are crossed, when measure is lost, when a being steps outside its proper place. It endangers the order and welcomes chaos. They demonstrate how order is maintained, how imbalance arises, and what consequences naturally follow from that imbalance. The outcomes are not arbitrary punishments handed down by a judge. They are the unfolding of how the world is structured and the nature of existence itself. For example, the Norse dwarf Fafnir he hoards treasure and is turned into a dragon out of greed. And if there's one thing Indo-European peoples disliked, it's when something blocks the flow, just like Fafnir does. Or when you see the serpent blocking the waters of life, for example. Sure, greed and being cheap isn't very nice characteristics, but again, this is rather about going against the natural order of things, doing unnatural things. It's essentially the idea of overstepping one's proper place, literally the wrong thing in the wrong place. And that's the next important point I want to bring up. Spiritual pollution and things being in the wrong place at the wrong time. If the core concern is not breaking a rule, but falling out of alignment with one's nature and the natural order, then wrongdoing isn't just an action, it's a kind of displacement. Something has been put where it doesn't belong. A balance has been disturbed, a pattern interrupted. And when that happens, the effect doesn't simply disappear once the act is over, it lingers. In Indo-European traditions, this kind of misalignment was understood almost as a form of contamination. Not in a moralistic sense or a moralistic sense of guilt before judging God, but as something more organic, like dirt in clean water, like having paint sprayed over you, or decay introduced into something living. When something is out of place, it doesn't just affect the external world. It begins to cling to the person, to their relationships, even to the spiritual dimension of their being. So it's a kind of spiritual pollution, the result of bringing the wrong thing into the wrong place, and thereby disturbing both the outer and inner order. So to understand how Indo-European peoples thought about wrongdoing, we have to shift our focus once again, away from guilt and punishment. Well, we can think of that too, but more about purity, balance, and the restoration of the right order. A very clear example of this way of thinking is how many Indo-European traditions viewed death. Death itself is not evil, it's natural, inevitable, and even necessary. But it belongs in its proper place among the dead, in its own realm, within its own part of the cosmic order. And mixing realms creates disorder. And because of that, being in close contact with death, such as handling a corpse or visiting a funeral, was often seen as polluting. Not because the person had done something morally wrong, but because they had come in contact with something that didn't belong among the living. Death had, in a sense, crossed a boundary, and that boundary crossing left a kind of residue that needed to be cleansed before normal life could resume. And this same pattern shows up in many other areas. A ritual performed in the wrong order, for example, it wasn't just incorrect, it could be ineffective or even harmful because it disrupted the proper structure that maintained harmony between humans and the divine. Same thing with the wrong words or the wrong poetry or prayers. The issue isn't disobedience, it is that the elements are no longer in their rightful place. The priest isn't morally sinful among pagans. The cosmic mechanism has been misaligned. Breaking an oath is another powerful example. Words, promises, and bonds were seen as real forces that held society together. To break an oath was to tear something out of its proper place, creating instability, not just socially, but cosmically. It disrupted the fabric of frith, that's to say, peace and order within the community. It destabilized the web of relationships that maintained social and divine harmony. Even social behavior followed this logic. Failing in hospitality, turning away a guest, for example, wasn't merely rude, it was a violation of a deeply embedded order where host and guest had defined roles. Same order and rules as in a ritual. And when those roles were ignored, something fundamental was out of alignment. Across all these examples, the pattern is the same. Wrongdoing is not primarily about being bad. It's about putting the wrong thing in the wrong place or allowing something to remain where it doesn't belong. And when that happens, it creates a kind of spiritual imbalance or pollution, something that must be corrected, cleansed, and set right in order for harmony to be restored. Earlier I mentioned Vedic concepts like Papa, Enas, Aga, Amhas, etc. The most common such pollution concept among the ancient Greeks was miasma. And miasma is spiritual pollution, contamination and defilement, and it could arise from contact with death or a corpse, being present at a funeral, entering sacred space improperly. Just think of Remus and Romulus. And even from childbirth, since we once again see two realms meeting, which was considered dangerous. Even justified killing, for example in war, could produce miasma. Again, the issue isn't moral depravity, it's the boundary violation between realms. The concept hamartia literally means missing the mark and was closer to miscalculation or flawed action. Only later, under Christian influence, did it become strongly sin. And their word asebeia can be interpreted as impiety or improper reverence, but not necessarily because jealous gods need us, because they don't. They exist no matter if we believe in them or not. But because in that case we might have broken social and hospitality laws, the so-called Gosti principle and the rule of reciprocity. I recommend the Humming Up podcast episode 4, I think. I'll write it here. The Romans, whose traditions were extremely technical and ritualistic, they were obsessed with something called nefas. And nefas is often interpreted as sin nowadays, but it literally means not divine order or not according to divine order. So back in the day, if something was nefas, it violated sacred order. For example, the poet Ovid's work Fasti is basically a calendar of when it's right to do certain things or when not to do it. And so nefas is therefore the opposite of that, doing the wrong thing at the wrong time or wrong place. And our word religion comes from the Romans religio, which to them meant scrupulous observance and careful ritual correctness or attention to divine obligations. It never meant faith. It was careful maintenance of right relationship and ritual. And the same thing with their piaculum. If a ritual or worship in the home or publicly had been performed incorrectly, a piaculum was required. It's an act of atonement, an action performed to repair an error or compensatory sacrifice. So the system assumes error will happen, The solution is technical correction, not confessional depravity. On the Humming platform, I will also teach how we perform piacular offerings, both when we actually have done or said something wrong in worship and as a preventive action. Among Germanic peoples, we see concepts like, for example, varg and need. Varg is a Germanic word for wolf, so this concept means that you become an outlaw, someone outside social order. So if you've committed certain acts like kinslaying, you've ruptured the frith, you've gone against order and harmony. You've broken the social bonds so badly that you no longer is considered a human being, but a wolf. You're therefore outside the realm of humans, and in that sense, you're polluted. Look, for example, at the Fenrir wolf, a perfect example of this. Fenrir literally means someone who dwells in the wilderness. That's to say, outside the domestic and sacred, outside the ordered and the divine. He is a symbol of someone or something in nature or cosmos standing outside the divine order, representing chaos and what cannot be tamed. Actions change your place in the social and cosmic world, and he is therefore represented by a wolf. Need is a state of dishonor, shame, and social inversion. Your acts have created deep disorder and instability in the honor structure of society, and therefore cosmos, since those two, of course, belong together. The gods of social and cosmic order in Indo-European spirituality are very close partners. And the result is breakdown of order, exclusion, and curse. Needing is someone who, because of his or her actions, creates unbalance in social and cosmic relations, and therefore attracts chaos and bad luck. You've gone against what makes you an honorable part of society, and therefore you no longer belong. And again, Indo-European peoples did not like liminal states. So let's come back to the question many of you are really asking. Am I a sinner? If you're approaching this from an Indo-European pagan perspective, then no, not in the way you may have been taught. You're not born guilty. You're not inherently flawed or morally corrupt. You're not living under constant judgment, waiting for approval or forgiveness from an external authority. And maybe even more importantly, you are not dependent on someone else to fix you. What you are is a human being placed within a living world of relationships, forces, and responsibilities. A being capable of acting in harmony or falling out of harmony and alignment. And when you do fall out of alignment, the answer isn't condemnation, it's not shame, it's not waiting for forgiveness from the outside. The answer is action, and it's restoration. If something is out of place, you can help put it back. If you've caused harm, you can repair it. If you've disrupted balance, you can work to restore it. If you've acted against your better nature, you can realign with it. This is a fundamentally different way of seeing yourself. Instead of asking, "Am I forgiven?" you ask, "What can I do to make this right?" Instead of waiting for salvation, you engage in personal responsibility and growth. Instead of being dependent on external grace, you participate in bringing yourself and your world back into order. And there's something deeply empowering in that, because it means you're not stuck in a permanent state of failure. You're not defined by a single mistake. You're not separated from what is good by some unbridgeable gap. You are part of the same living system you're trying to align with. And alignment is something you can move toward, step by step, action by action, choice by choice. And now let's talk about something just as important. Why do you still feel like a sinner, even after leaving that worldview? Because this isn't just about beliefs, it's about conditioning. If you've spent years, maybe your entire life, being taught to think in terms of sin, guilt, judgment and punishment, and that you're harmed or dysfunctional from the beginning, then your mind will keep using that framework automatically. Even if intellectually you no longer believe in it. So when something goes wrong, what's the first thought that appears? Did I sin? Am I a bad person? Will I be punished? Those thoughts don't come from your current worldview. They come from old patterns that are still running in the background. You've been programmed. So instead of trying to suppress them or feeling ashamed that they're still there, try something different. Catch the thought and then question it. When you notice yourself thinking, did I sin? Then pause and ask instead, what actually happened here? Did I harm someone or something? Did I disrupt something or act out of alignment? When you think, am I guilty? Ask, is there something I need to take responsibility for? Is there something I can repair, restore, or do better next time? And when you feel, I'm afraid I'll be punished, ask yourself, what are the natural consequences of this? And what would bring things back into balance? Do you notice the shift here? You're moving from fear to understanding, from guilt to responsibility, from paralysis to action. And this is the key transformation. You're no longer standing outside yourself, waiting to be judged. You are standing inside your life, actively participating in it. And here's the important part. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be aware, honest, and willing to adjust and to find your best self. Because in this worldview, mistakes are not proof that you're broken already from the beginning. They are signals. Signals that something is out of alignment. Signals that something needs attention. Signals that something can be worked with. So the next time that old fear shows up, the fear of sinning, don't fight it, but use it. Let it be the moment where you pause, reflect, and ask, what is actually out of place here? And what can I do to set it right? That question alone can completely change how you relate to yourself, to your actions, and the world around you. So if we move away from guilt and toward this idea of balance, the next natural question becomes, what do I actually do when something is out of balance? Because this is where the real shift happens. In an Abrahamic framework, the solution is often external. Seek forgiveness, confess, be absolved. But in an Indo-European framework, the response is active and practical. If something is out of order, you don't just feel bad about it, you do something to restore it. So instead of stopping at I feel guilty or I have sinned, you move to what needs to be set right. What am I responsible for and what can I do? Did you harm someone? Then repair the relationship if you can. Did you act dishonorably? Then correct your behavior and re-establish your integrity. Did you disrupt something, socially, spiritually, or internally? Then take steps to rebalance it, whether through action, apology, ritual, or reflection. Did you forget something when you prayed or in a ritual? Then do it again. Start over and do it again. So this is the key replacement. From I am bad and guilty and a sinner to something is out of balance because of my actions or something, and I can do something about it. Do you feel the difference here? One leads to shame and passivity. The other leads to responsibility and movement. And that also means something very important. You're not stuck. There's no permanent stain on your soul. There is no point of no return. There's no need to wait for someone else to make you whole again. Because restoration is not something granted to you from the outside. It is something you participate in. Step by step, action by action. You can clean what has been dirtied, repair what has been damaged, realign with what has drifted out of place. And sometimes the action is small, acknowledging a mistake, making a different choice next time, bringing awareness where there was none before. And other times it's bigger, making amends, changing patterns, consciously rebuilding something you've disrupted. But in all cases, the principle is the same. You are not defined by the imbalance. You are defined by how you respond to it. And that is where your power lies. Also remember here that the Harmonia platform is full of piacular actions, rituals, prayers, etc. Now let's bring all this together. If you take one thing away with you from this video, let it be this. You are not a sinner in the way you may have been taught. You are not born broken. You are not inherently guilty. You're not living under constant judgment from a distant authority. What you are is something much more grounded and much more powerful. You are a being within the world, not separated from it. A part of a living, ordered cosmos. A participant in a web of relationships, responsibilities, and forces. And that changes everything. Because now, when something goes wrong, the question is no longer, what's wrong with me? But what is out of balance and what can I do about it? You don't need to fear that you've fallen into some permanent state of failure. You don't need to carry around a sense of invisible guilt. You don't need to wait for forgiveness to be granted. You can act, you can adjust, you can restore. And that means your path is not about escaping your nature. It's about living in alignment with it. Seek it, your true nature, your best self, and align with it. That is spirituality. Not about denying the world, but about participating in it fully and consciously. Not about being saved, but about becoming responsible and better. This is the shift from guilt to responsibility, from fear to understanding, from passivity to action, from separation to belonging. So no, you're not a sinner. You are someone who can fall out of balance. and just as importantly, someone who can always find your way back. And then finally, will you burn in hell? No. You might end up in hell, but hell in the original Germanic or Norse tradition is where most people end up after death. It's a place for those who die from age, sickness, or normal death. It's neither good nor bad, it's neutral, just like life itself. And you definitely won't burn there in hell or be tormented there, because hell is described as cold, misty, and serene.